Protests, which began a little while ago, have been massive. They've been small. They've been everywhere. They've been violent. They've been peaceful, but it has been a tumultuous time. Ukraine seems so far away to some, but there are an awful lot of Ukrainian Canadians. This has been unsettling for them, but it's been unsettling for the world as a whole. My next guest, Krystina Waller, is with the Ukrainian Canadian Congress of St. Catharines and was in Ukraine when all of these protests began. And in fact, I think, Krystina, you were in Kiev at the time, right?
I was, yes.
What took you to Kiev at that point?
So I initially went over there for a humanitarian aid route with an organization called Help Us Help the Children.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, our shoes that we were supposed to be delivering were held up at customs, which is very typical of Ukraine, so we were unable to disperse them to where we needed to. So instead, we were able to join in the protests starting November 21st and to help the people there and stand with them and support them in their fight for democracy.
Right now you're doing a master's at U of T, right?
I am, yes.
What's your master's in?
It's in health technology assessment and management.
Wow. And any thoughts of ever taking that master's and going to Ukraine to actually put it into effect?
Absolutely. I lived there for 3 years prior to this. I came back in 2010 to start my master's, and I was doing clinical trials there at the time. So I've always been interested in going back and helping form a stronger healthcare system there afterwards.
So I say that because it kind of puts into everybody's mind, you know what you're talking about when it comes to Ukraine right now, Ukrainian politics and that kind of thing. In your mind, what started the protests? What was it that began the whole thing? I mean, the rest of the world sees it happening. They see a few stories about, what the Ukrainian president has done. But what really began the protests?
On November 21st, the president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, had made promises to the country that he would be signing a trade agreement with the EU. And when at the last minute he pulled out of this agreement, people were angry. They were angry because they were looking to a brighter future, under European standards.
And then he signed a bailout deal with the Russians, right?
Yes, after that, he has agreed, yes, for $15 billion.
Yeah, which I guess made a lot of people a little nervous that this was backtracking toward the bad old days of the Soviet Union.
Absolutely. And when he started using force on peaceful protesters, which started on November 30th, the Internal Ministry Special Forces Backtracking came and cleared Independence Square, savagely beating many students, hundreds of students. People really realized that we are going back to those times, and it terrified them, and so hundreds of thousands of people started coming out.
How massive have these protests become?
I was there for several. On Sundays, they do these Viche, these massive marches, and one Sunday I was there, December 1st, they said anywhere from 800,000 to over 1 million on the Ukrainian news channels. In the West, they reported it as hundreds of thousands. I personally felt that it was definitely in the numbers that the Ukrainian media was portraying. It was massive and moving to be there for it.
How dangerous has it been to be a protester in Ukraine?
For the most part, the violence is it was, I should say, until last week, very concentrated to a small area, and until the Backtracking, the special forces, started using weapons against the people. 6 people have died now. 30 are missing, at least. And over 200,000 have been injured. And the scary part is that they seem to be targeting journalists and doctors who are helping these people, which is very, Soviet and going back to these times. And so what they don't realize is that they just ignite more fire in the Ukrainian protesters. And the more they do this, the more people uprise. And they're not ready to leave until the president himself is gone out of power.
And how safe is Yanukovych at this point? I mean, does he just stand back and say, well, I'm president, I'm doing this anyway? Has he tried concessions? What's going on now?
So he accepted the resignation of his prime minister recently. and which in turn is the resignation of the cabinet of ministers as well. So it seems on the surface that he's taking steps to try and find some sort of compromise, but he himself is refusing to leave power, and that's what the people really want.
Will you go back?
I would love to. I have plans to. In March, we finally were able to get these shoes that we were originally supposed to hand out of customs, and in the middle of March, we're hoping to disperse them depending on what the political climate is like, because the protests have moved from just being concentrated in Kyiv to across the whole country once those very draconian laws were put in place.
How concerned? Sorry to interrupt. I'm really interested. How concerned is the Ukrainian-Canadian community about all of this?
Extremely, and we're very grateful to the Right Honourable Stephen Harper and the Honourable John Baird and Chris Alexander for starting to put in visa sanctions to high-ranking officials responsible for all the violence. But we need more from them. We need more, and we need to show that we support the Ukrainian people on a higher level.
Krystina, thank you so much for this. Hopefully we can talk again, because you've got some great insight into this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for bringing light to this. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Krystina Waller is with the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress in St. Catharines. It's just coming up on 26 after 8. Hey, guys.